I'm Kayla Dice, and this is Your Life Path. I'm an out-of-control tabletop role-playing game designer, and on this show I talk to TTRPG designers and other exciting guests about everything that inspires or influences them away from role-playing. My guest today is soon to be launching the back kit campaign for the really exciting-looking Little Wolves, which does already have a demo out. Please welcome to the show, Nevyn Holmes.
Hello, hi, that's me. I'm Nevyn Holmes. I'm one half of Dinoberry Press. We are a queer TTRPG design and publishing company based out of Central Texas. We make weird stuff that's experimental in fun ways and like really just inspired by the stuff that we love. And yeah, like Kayla said, we're launching Little Wolves soon on BackerKit.
Yeah, and probably people may know you most from Gun&SLINGER. You're in Space
Gun&SLINGER's
and
the big one.
Fucked.
You're in Space is the most recent one. Justicar. Those are the three projects that I was the lead on. But Jam has also been the lead on Motel Spooky 9, which is a solo journaling game about monster romance. And Dinocar, which funnily enough was directly inspired by Justicar. And that is an art making game about being dinosaurs driving around a city. Those are kind of our big things that people would probably know us from. We've done a bunch of other little stuff too, though.
Yeah, I think I always find so exciting about the projects coming out from the both of you is really just this. I don't think there's this solid thing of I know what a Dinoberry Press project's going to look like. It's always a new sort of discovery of where you're going to go, what you're going to explore and stuff, and it's really exciting to see stuff that feels just very unique from the creators who've made it.
Thank you very much. We put a lot of effort into making sure that every game we work on is very different, exploring different genres or different styles, but also while just being 110% us. I've heard a couple of my friends have said oh, this is so Dinoberry core, and that's very flattering to hear somebody say.
Yeah, it's awesome for people to have that sense of being yourself. So I guess first leading into sort of different biographical questions. Obviously based out of Texas now. Did you grow up in Texas or did you grow up elsewhere?
Yeah, I've kind of grown up mostly in Texas. My dad was in the Marines when I was a kid, so we kind of moved around a lot. I was born in California. We lived in Ohio and South Carolina for a bit. But for the majority of my life, I would say since I was 5 or 6, I've been in Texas. So grown up here, grown up surrounded by family, my dad's side of the family, and just living in Yeehawville, essentially.
How do you feel Texas has sort of informed your work? I know that can be a sort of a bit of a hard question to answer in terms of how does the place you've spent all of your life and don't necessarily have an easy contrast to what your life have been. But are there relevant elements of your work where you feel this is so at least informed by the individual quirks of growing up in this place, or whether it's I'm channeling local history or areas or stuff like that?
I don't know that it's necessarily the place itself that has influenced my work. I mean, I guess definitely to a degree it has. Most of my time growing up here has been in suburbia. Suburbs here are suburbs anywhere else. We got streets with houses on them and sidewalks and a couple of schools. There's the corner store down the road, very quote unquote normal, whatever that means. But I've traveled around to a lot of different places in Texas too, and I've traveled around the country quite a bit as I was growing up. I think I've been to each corner of the United States at one point, just growing up again, because we moved around a lot, and we have family kind of scattered everywhere. there's definitely a vibe in some of my work that is like, what would it be like to be somewhere else? Because it's the suburbs, it's boring, there's nothing going on here. But I think more than that, it's the people that I've grown up with and around that have affected my work, or the people of the state itself that have affected my work. It is louder, it is more queer, as a result of, the kind of, unfortunately, right-wing culture that pervades in Texas. But even beyond that, there's my family, my direct family that I've grown up around, and then my extended family, who I am thankfully around less, that have kind of affected how loud I am in my work about certain things. And I'm not as loud as others, but I'm as loud as I want to be.
And that loudness can sometimes feel like a response, which makes sense. Like,
yeah,
responsiveness.
I would definitely consider it.
Express.
I would definitely consider it a response. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it, to the people I grew up around, or to me learning about myself and discovering my identity and continuing to do so through my work and through the place that I live.
Yeah, no, totally. I was talking with my younger brother recently. He lives in Australia now, and does music. And he was asking me, we don't really talk much for a mix of reasons that I won't go into on the podcast, but he was asking me about games because like both of us are trying to do that. And our like biological father, who like left our lives very early. I know just via my mum that he was like doing like executive stuff, and I sort of do imagine like how like you wouldn't have imagined your two kids just both being sort of struggling, starving artists, and I got a sense of satisfaction of that. Like, yeah, and what?
Exactly. A lot of what we do is out of spite, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of like that, in a weird way ties into this idea of like, yeah, imagining what you might be when you were younger, or the images people had of you. Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes, I do. For a long time, this is bear with me here as I get to it. When I was a child, a wee little baby, I grew up. My dad watched a lot of Monty Python. Like that was like a core comedic touchstone for me when I was growing up, was Monty Python. And when I was a kid, up into the ages of like 10, I would say that I wanted to be John Cleese. And as I like, specifically, that was the answer. People were like, you want to be like a comedian? I was like, no, I want to be this guy. But as I grew up, I kind of realized like, I want to be an entertainer. I want to be a comedian. For a while, I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a teacher, specifically of like theater courses. And really kind of what I've realized is I want to entertain and give people space to entertain themselves. I actually did stand up for a little while, in my senior year of high school. I had a few routines, I had a few gigs. It was fun. Not for me. That's a hard life. But
Yeah, no, totally.
I've done a lot of that kind of entertainment style stuff. I've done video essays on YouTube. I've done Let's Plays. Like, if it is about entertainment or doing entertaining for people, I've probably wanted or done it in some degree.
That's cool. Jumping off that, I actually just have a couple of few different questions that sort of all popped into my mind. I'll just go sort of one at a time. But yeah, thinking about like entertainment, which is often in a sort of like performing art space, and connecting that to RPGs. I had Gormangeist on the podcast, but she was talking about RPGs and saying like she finds that like the number she prefers playing with is one where there is both like the players and an audience. Like it's also, you're playing it to be entertaining your friends who are your own audience at that time. And I guess I was like wondering, both like in terms of like stand up and other forms of like live entertainment, do you feel like that is something that has greatly like informed your sense of play, which in turn, I imagine, links into the sense of the games you make?
I think it definitely has. I don't think there's any possible way that it hasn't, I guess is probably the better way to answer that. I don't know if I could point to specific examples, but when I'm playing or running or whatever, I definitely, turn the dial up a little bit, so to speak. I get into it, I have fun, and I try to make sure that everybody's having fun. And I guess that is a pretty one-to-one relationship with live performance and entertainment and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other question I was when you were talking about being very into Monty Python is it was making me think there for like some of your games there can be like a comedic sensibility to them. Not necessarily like I'm trying to think like I feel there's like a humorous bluntness to like just the title of You're in Space and Everything's Fucked, even while the game itself
It's
is
so
obviously
good.
serious horror. And I think there's elements of that in lots of your other work as well. And I guess like do you think
Mhm.
like a lot of your sense of humor in your work is informed by Python? Can you see other influences there?
It's definitely influenced by Monty Python. I to this day I'm still a huge fan of it, and there's certain skits that I used to be able to quote nonstop because my brother and I would quote them nonstop. But there's I think what I really kind of find the absurdity of it. I really like absurdist comedy, and I think in each of my games there is either explicitly or implicitly there's room for absurdity. Um or the premise itself is absurd. Like Kitchen Nightmares, a game that is designed with Chris Bissett, um, is about a knight from the Middle Ages getting a job at a diner in 1999. Um, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. Justicar encourages you to make absolutely gonzo characters. And then to talk specifically about You're in Space, horror and comedy for me go hand in hand. I think that horror shines best when there's a little bit of comedy to it. At least it's my favorite realm to play in when I'm making things. I do also
Mm.
love just straight up horror and monster movies and all that stuff, but um, I like to encourage people to play You're in Space serious just to see what it's like. But I almost always run it a little bit goofy because that's just how I am.
Yeah, I think for like certain kinds of horror and certain kinds of comedy, I guess I'm thinking like maybe between like a comparison between like splatter horror and like cringe comedy. There is this sort of like I was gonna phrase it really like in a way that sounds bad. I was gonna phrase it almost like as like a suspension of empathy for the main character. And obviously you're like very
Yes,
sympathetic
yes,
to their
yes.
plight, but like you don't entirely
I want to see it.
like you
I
enjoy
want
the
to see
bad
it
things
happen.
happening to them more than the good
Yes.
things. It's just true in loads
Absolutely.
of
It's
comedy where it's like you love someone embarrassing themselves in this horrible situation.
exactly. God, yeah. I'm trying to think. Barbarian, I think is a great example of kind of suspension of empathy. Um, it's I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's basically kind of a
Vaguely
two-part
not
horror
seen it.
movie. Where it's about the world's worst Airbnb is what I'll say. But one of the characters is established very quickly as an absolutely horrible person. So it lets you just watch this movie rooting for him to get absolutely annihilated, and it's great. It's fun. It's wonderful. And then on the flip side, something like Alien, you're rooting for Ripley the whole time. But also when something scary happens, you're like into it. It's like, yes, awesome. I love to see the freaky xenomorph.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's that slight continuum where even at like the most sympathetic edge, there's still the case where you're enjoying the horrible thing happening because that's what you sort
I
of
want to
came
see
to
the bad
see.
thing happen. I want to see it go horrible. I can name so many movies where I love to see the horrible thing happen.
Yeah, and then in so often in comedy, there's that in either social situations or at
Mm-hmm.
least like yeah, in absurd situations where it's a similar thing where you are just sort of suspending that. But in this case, to find it funny, even though it's a different sort of emotional response. It's interesting. I'm like, yeah, I can see definitely aspects of that in a lot of role playing games as well in general. Like, I guess that's more of an approach within play rather than text always, but I think lots of good text can support a variety of those tonal approaches.
I would say I definitely try to hit that balance in You're in Space, and I think it's pretty clear in the text that I do. I was loud in that game about a lot of things.
Which is what makes it so fun, though, like it being loud and
Absolutely.
so itself. So you talked a bit about things you mentioned, having done some stand up while you were in college. I think you said. What did you study when
High
you
school.
went to college? High school.
I did
Oh
stand up
yeah.
my
So what did you
senior
do?
year in high school, but in high school I actually went to kind of a specialty school where you could kind of choose different career paths, so to speak. For a while I was in a tech field, just gearing up towards being like an engineer or a systems support person or like a developer. I hated that. So I switched to an art and design field, and I did that for the rest of my high school. And I enjoyed that, but it didn't work out. And then college, I was kind of just going for a basic degree. And I didn't finish. I didn't finish college because it's expensive and I had to work. So I actually entered the workforce pretty quick after high school, and I've been doing, funnily enough, IT work pretty much since I graduated.
Do you feel any of like that work is stuff that you find informing stuff you do, or do you think it's more like
Oh, yeah.
a separation, like an engine for
100% it's there. One of the first games I designed was Skeletons, spelled SKEL-IT-ONS, Skeletions. And it's
yeah.
about being a literal, actual animated skeleton working in the IT department for a small and medium business, which is what I have been doing for the last 6 years. I actually designed that game shortly after getting my current job. I think that my views on working and having to work and existing in a society are throughout every single game that I make.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I feel like there is not necessarily in every game, but like definitely in a lot of games, you are someone who works for someone else, and that someone else or something else is very remote, or like the fact that you're in whatever the situation is because of the need for a job, which is very true to
Listen,
reality.
my games, like me, hate capital. That's what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. So
It's
then
so funny. It
moving
got
from
to a
there.
point.
Oh,
Sorry, it got to a point where I would like start a game and I would send it to one of my friends, Keegan EXE. I sent them a game I was working on, and they read like the first 3 paragraphs that I had and messaged me, "Oh wow, Nevyn's making a game where capitalism is the bad guy. Who could have guessed?" I don't know what to say to that. I got.
yeah. I remember once I feel like it's funny because I feel like I can so like group a series of my games together where I'm like, yeah, these are games that are really sad about capitalism and having to work. These are games about being very mentally ill. These are games about like autism or whatever. And I did at one point think of clustering my itch page like that, but I then decided
That'd be
to just do
pretty.
something
That'd
more.
be kind of funny.
It'd be fun. I'd feel maybe more exposed than I necessarily like, at least on an itch page, versus say like talking
I
about in
think that's fair.
conversation.
Yeah.
But talk like moving now more specifically to RPGs. What was your introduction to RPGs?
Um, in high school, uh, in high school, I had a group of friends who were playing 3.5, done D&D 3.5 ed. Played that. Then played 4th edition with them. Played Shadowrun with them. And fell off of RPGs for about 5 or 6 years. got back into them when Critical Role hit the scene. Played D&D with a very good group of friends and my partner for a while. And then the first Zine month happened, or Zine Quest happened from Kickstarter. And I had that's kind of what made me aware that you can make these things. Like anybody can make one. And there are a couple of games, one game really that I got at Zine Quest that just blew my mind and kind of opened the floodgates, so to speak. That was Black Mass by Will Yost. I picked that up, and as soon as I read it, it was like a light went off, and I just have been designing games since.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, definitely, as well, from being in more sort of standard ways of what RPGs look like, and then definitely Black Mass, where it's it's a game that even breaks
It's
apart
so
the sort of simple assumption a lot of places have of you play one character. Or one player has a character, and yeah, I can see how it really sort of changed things. And so then that was what got you on the journey to Skeletons, and from there into so many other things.
Yep, 100%.
So on this note, do you remember when you first considered yourself a writer?
I have thought about this. Not really. I don't know that there was a specific moment where I was like, yes, I am a writer. Hello, it's me. I've kind of just been writing my whole life. Since I was in elementary school, I've been writing short stories and poetry and stuff like that. And I've been doing writing in one form or another since then, really. Short stories, poetry. I did video game reviews. I did analysis of indie video games on YouTube for 4 or 5 years. Then I got into designing RPGs, and that's all writing. This is just kind of my whole life, but I don't know that there's been a moment where I've said, yes, I am a writer.
Yeah. Just one of those things that it's feel like a need, or feels as instinctual as how some people, I don't know, make food.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I write, I do writing, but it's not the thing that I am. I more consider myself a designer than that.
And this then ties into simplification. Well, I phrase it as do you remember for writer? Because I feel like lots of people just flat out don't. But do you know, is how I phrase it for this one, when you first considered yourself a designer?
Yeah, I think it was the moment GUN&SLINGER's crowdfunding campaign succeeded. That's when I kind of realized it happened and I can do this. This is what I'm going to do. It was the first, I love this. It was first crowdfunding campaign. I took the day off work because I knew I wasn't going to be able to think about anything else. We hit launch on the page, and then Jam and I went to go get groceries. And by the time we were in the checkout line, the project had funded.
Sick.
Absolutely world-changing moment right there. Life-changing moment. In the checkout line at Costco. surrounded by 50 or 60 people who are just thinking about the great deal they got on a big bag of potatoes, and I'm there having an identity crisis because this just succeeded so much quicker than I thought it.
Yeah,
I would say that was the moment when I was I game designer, me do game design.
Yeah, it's I guess the moment of I've designed this thing, and everyone's going yes, we're so on board and want to see more of this. Because we want to see more of you, a designer.
Yeah, exactly.
So from here, I'm going to go into some more specific questions on your work. And I wanted to begin with Justicar. And actually, I wanted to begin, I guess, talking a lot about sort of different genres. Because I think of you and Gemma's creators who really explore so many different genre spaces. And Justicar is a game of courtroom drama. And one of the first sections in the book gives an explanation of the genre and provides touchstones across various media, from I think it really covers so many different medias because it goes from theater, games, TV, film as well. And I wanted to know what appeals to you about the genre of courtroom drama, and how you went about conveying those aspects through the game and to the players and whoever was reading the scene, getting ready to facilitate play.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I really enjoy about courtroom shenanigans. Um, the specific touchstones that I call it in the book, that I always reference to people are My Cousin Vinny, the Ace Attorney video game series, and Legally Blonde. And those all have like one big thing in common, and it's the characters. It's these absolutely ridiculous, goofy characters put into strange situations, having to figure out something that's varying degrees of serious. I love the characters in this genre, and I also love the aspect of like, oh, it's kind of a mystery. I really enjoy mystery stories, and this is just a fun framework for presenting them. Trying to figure out what the puzzle pieces are and then how they fit together and how those things relate to each other is very fun for me to watch. I like watching it all unfold, even if I've seen it a dozen times. And when it came to conveying that in the game, I kind of... Justicar was a very difficult design process. It's a game unlike anything I've ever designed before, and one of the first things that I did after I knew I was going to be making this game was to sit down and write out like, all right, what is everything that I like about this genre, and what of those things do I want to make sure are in here? It was almost everything that I wrote down on that list was like, it's going to be in the game in some way. And it was from there just a matter of figuring out, how does this work? How does this game look? How does it move? What does it want to be? And how do I bring these things into it? Justicar originally started... a friend of mine wanted me to come onto his TTRPG campaign that he was having with his friends and act as the judge in a trial scene for some stuff that had happened. He wanted a completely impartial person who had no idea what was going on. And my dumbass said, okay, cool, let me design a game for this. So I designed like, I was really into PBTA at the time, so I designed like a coin or like a token based system with PBTA style moves. We played it, it worked, and I knew exactly what I needed to do to make it better, or at least I thought I did, and then I spent like a year trying to make it better. And there were a lot of things coming at that game from different angles that helped shape how each of these aspects was rep.
Yeah, was it a game you were having to test a lot and feel like you were, getting the desired sort of experience, both in terms of this, how does this play and how fun is it, but also in terms of like, how is this an example of a kind of story?
Yeah, 100%. I think it was the first game that I really play tested a lot, and every playtest led to big changes. The session with my friend in his campaign would definitely be like an alpha playtest that just proved that the concept had legs, and I hadn't intended to do more work until that was like so much fun. But I knew the ways from there that it worked and that it didn't, and what I needed to bring in or remove. And over the course of maybe 5 or 6 more playtests, full like 4 to 5 hour long playtest sessions, it gained the form that it has.
Yeah. How at what point of development did the corkboard element come in? Do you remember?
Immediately.
Okay.
It was immediate.
Because that feels so core to the... And like...
Oh, yeah.
That sense of, mapping out a mystery.
Mm-hmm. That was, to some degree, it was there for that first version, in that like I needed people to tell me about who their characters were, so I had context and we like mapped out their relationships. But it was very minimal. It was once I knew it was going to be like a full trial thing that I kind of sat down and I thought, okay, how do we establish for everyone at the table what's going on here? Let's take a world building game spin on it, and let's just have everybody create different components. All right, well, now we have these different people and we have their relationships. What else do we need to add? Oh, well, we should create evidence. How does evidence work? Well, it's going to have these two aspects to it. All right. Once we have evidence, who decides who gets to use the evidence? And it was kind of very, thinking about it now, while it was extremely difficult to design this game, it was very like thing one leads to two leads to three. Like it very much followed a process or a flow. There was just a lot of figuring out why aren't these things working, or how should they be changed to work better.
Yeah, almost figuring out like how a machine functions, I suppose.
Exactly.
And the map the world building thing also makes sense with raising loads of questions, because like Core Drama is often like a game about like truth, and you as players all sort of like, I guess, need a certain basis of like what's true, while also knowing that you're all inventing things collaboratively, and also that you might be lying as characters frequently, not as players, but like, so the map makes sense for reinforcing, well, here's what's true.
Mm-hmm. These are things that are true, that as players we all know are true. When characters are talking, we should assume that they're telling the truth, unless they use certain moves. But when they use those moves, we, the players, will know that they are lying. There was a moment in development, I don't remember exactly when, but I kind of realized like, oh, this is a game about dramatic irony. That is 100% what this is, because the players have every single piece of information and their own ideas of what did or didn't happen. And everyone's playing in their own realm of dramatic irony and leaning into that. And once I kind of realized that that's what this game wanted to be, a lot of things came together after that. That was also like very near the end of development when that happened. So of course I didn't figure it out early.
Yeah, I feel so often in games you're often like realizing partway through what they're like about in some senses.
It's very fun. I always feel a little pretentious when I say this, but as I design games, I try to listen to what it wants to be. Like I'll have ideas and I'll put them down, and it's like, all right, how does this feel? How does this work? Does it feel good? Does it feel bad? Does it lean into what I want this game to be, or is it completely different? Am I shifting the focus?
Yeah, I wrote a playbook for a game recently called Psycho Dungeon that I will have coming out at some point. And I was writing just like a werewolf playbook, and while just like really, I was writing without not necessarily knowing what I was writing, just what felt cool. And then I read it afterwards and I was like, oh, I've written something about chronic pain. That makes sense. I didn't know I was doing that at the time.
I didn't realize I didn't realize how queer and trans, frankly, GUN&SLINGER is until like a year after I'd released it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so yeah, switching tracks here to GUN&SLINGER. So that's like a Western adjacent game. They're not a traditional Western. And you're very openly and consciously engaging critically with the genre in the pages of the book, which I think is very necessary if you're engaging with the Western as a genre space at all. But I wondered if you'd be able to expand on the like aspects of that genre space that you wanted to explore, and the sort of process of creating separation from the genre's like terrible history.
Yeah. I'll start by saying I enjoy a Western. I think that's a fun genre to watch. It's also a lot of what I grew up on. But it is 100% bad. It's bad. It ain't good. There's some very problematic stuff in the genre about, you know, the idolization of colonialism and westward expansion. You know, the elevation of quote unquote manifest destiny as being a good thing. The othering of anyone who isn't white and Christian is unfortunately a very frequent thing in Westerns, like historically speaking. The good Westerns aren't really like that, or they play against those expectations. A lot of my appreciation for the genre is in media that plays against that. Or in media that acknowledges that everyone that you are watching is a terrible person.
Yeah.
going back to what we were talking about earlier about suspension of empathy, right? When it came to Gun&Slinger, I knew that the concept of the game itself of being a person and their sentient gun just leans really well inherently into being a Weird West kind of space, kind of aesthetic. And I'm very careful in the book to say that this is not a Western. I don't want people to tell traditional Western stories with this. I remember talking with a Native American consultant at the time. I had someone come on as a sensitivity consultant, and he looked over the book and the rules and helped me come up with a lot of things. Told me what I was doing right and gave me a few things to adjust. Working with a consultant was the big number one thing. But I also had some good ideas at the time of like, here are things that I know I don't want people to do. There's a statement right up at the very front of the book. I think it's a spread, maybe a spread and a half.
Yeah.
That like talks about the genre and is like, here's what's bad about this genre and here's what I want you to play with instead. And the things that I really want people to play with in Gun&Slinger are the ideas of like, okay, these are communities that are spread apart by hostile landscape. There are the people in these communities inherently work together because they need to. And the thing that is truly villainous is not the people, but these malevolent forces in the world. Like there are supernatural aspects of nature that form the quote unquote villain. And you know, there's different thematic readings of the twist, which is that force that I've heard. I have my own in mind. But I don't like to enforce it too much to prescribe it on other people. But the point of the game really is work together, don't alienate other people, and try to survive.
Yeah, and I think that that adjacency, you've created a space and story where you can explore similar themes of like, you know, survival, harshness, like comfort in the face of sort of isolation, as well as the, you know, sort of tropes and stuff that are less sort of conveyed, while being something much more considerate. That feels a weird phrase to use, but it's the only one that sort of came to my mind.
I think it works.
Yeah. Speaking of like the setting in more detail and the twist, at least in part, like the setting in Gun&Slinger is evocative, while I think also not being very prescriptive. What you're talking there about, like, you have your idea of what the twist is, but you've not loaded that into the book as a sort of directive, and you're not like going around telling people like, oh, this is how you should be playing the twist, by the way. There's the expectation that like places, people, and possibilities are going to be created collaboratively in play rather than necessarily always solidly provided by the book. And I find that space really exciting for me as a player, and I think it's anchored by some very like vivid phrasing around like key aspects of the world. Like I think like the simpleness of like, oh, what is this force that affects the world? It's the twist. Like your sort of first antagonist of like the thing that hunts and the pale moon and other terms, they're all very like, they're immediately so interesting. I'm like, I want to know more about them. And the game is sort of providing space of like, okay, you're one of the people who's going to be responsible for, you know, help like making what more about them actually is. So I was wondering how you approach like sort of, yeah, different like sort of key terms and such.
A big aspect of the kind of world creation stuff in Gun&Slinger, quite frankly, came from two places. One, I didn't want to write a whole setting. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to write pages and pages and pages of here's what these things are. Here's their deep lore, their deep history. Not that I don't have that information. I just didn't want to write it for a number of reasons. Page count, time, effort, focus being elsewhere on the project. And two, the setting of Gun&Slinger is actually a setting from a short story that I've written. And I was like, I want to revisit this world, but I don't want to force people to play in it in certain ways. So let's update the setting, let's review some things, and let's bring it all together here. I think that there's a whole section in the book that is like, here are questions that you need to answer together to establish things about your world. And along with describing that, like, there's a twist in the thing that hunts in the super basic history told as like a myth. Those questions also, by asking the questions, establish some facts about the world. Like, one of the questions establishes that there are, full stop, there are these magical artifacts that people uncover, and they all have a unique scent and shape, but nobody knows what they do. That's a specific thing from the setting that I brought into this game. The planet has a name, but I haven't told anybody what it is yet, and I'm not going to. Then with regards to coming up with the names for the specific things, I love Bloodborne. I think that's kind of a big part of it there. Bloodborne has these ridiculously absurd names for things that are so simple, yet so cool. And I kind of tried to channel a bit of that while also being in line with, the player is going to decide what these things are. So for the thing that hunts, I didn't want to be like, I don't know, Big Greg, he's going to get you. I didn't want to name it that. So I tried to follow, when it comes to these strange paranormal things, I tried to basically follow a guide of like, just name it after what it does or what it is. Something simple. What would people in the world call this thing? They don't know the true name of the twist, but they know what it does. It twists and it transforms things. Boom, there we go. It's the twist. They know that's not the real moon. We don't have one of those anymore. There's just this weird glowing thing in the sky. Well, it took over the place of our moon, so that's our moon now. What's that thing do? Is that Big Greg? No. That's the thing that hunts. Try and make it very general. It just so happens that like the terms all lean really well into the horror or the weirdness of it.
Yeah. I was going to say when you were talking about like the level of detail you wanted, it was actually reminding me of like the kind of impression of setting you get from video games, which often might have like much more deeper stuff contained in often like supplemental material, though sometimes just in like things you can dig if you are that kind of player in a video game. But
I am.
If you do like say a sort of quicker run, you get that those more impressions and this mood and aesthetics. So yeah, Bloodborne is an influence. Then immediately I was like, oh right, cool. I was on the right wavelength for what I was just thinking there.
Yep.
So on like thinking still of like genre, and they said like horror elements in Gun&Slinger, but switching track to you're in space and everything's fucked. Horror is like so wide. But the game specifically calls itself as an homage to sci-fi splatter horror. And I wondered about the specifics of that subgenre and what it was that both like appealed to you personally. We've talked about that a bit before already, like with the links to comedy, but I imagine you might have more to elaborate on as it comes to like the sci-fi element and how you thought about translating or transliterating that stuff into a interesting and exciting play experience.
Things that are important to foreground, I think there's probably three. Gore and gruesome, fucked up guys. I love a freaky little monster. I think they're great. I really wanted it to feel like playing through a monster movie. The absurdity of it all, like it's ridiculous, and we should be able to lean into that and have fun with that. And anti-cap. The big favorites are like in the genre for me. The big favorites are like anti-capitalist or anti-hubris or we shouldn't have played God, or I opened a portal to the hell dimension and now I have to reckon with the consequences. I really wanted to bring all that stuff in. I kind of wanted it to be a thing that people could take and be like, I am going to play Event Horizon in this game, or I am going to play Dead Space or Alien. It's all the meaty, gross, crunchy bits of the genre are what I really, really wanted to bring in. I realized recently that the year I began working on You're in Space was also a year where I watched almost exclusively horror films. Um, so there's some obvious stuff that kind of got pulled in there.
Yeah. I mean, like, in some ways, much of the generation you do and play in You're in Spaced and Everything's Fucked works almost, to my at least, like a genre scaffold. Like, you're generating rooms, threats, and other specifics, and that kind of brings the game from, like, the idea of genre to being part of the genre. If that makes sense as what I'm saying there, of like, I translates it as like, oh yeah, now we've got this thing, we've got this monster, we've got this terrible hazard or something. And some choices sort of fine-tune that genre experience further. Like if you involve a cosmic horror element, that's taking you into a different thing. And yeah, I guess how did you approach the various sort of generation tools? Both, I guess, terms in thinking about genre and horror and sci-fi, but also thinking about just what you were equipping the two players with.
I played and engaged with a lot of media that was in the genre. After I had like the core mechanics of the game down, the dice system, and once I was like, okay, I know that I want people to generate rooms. I wanted this to be a low to no prep game as much as possible, but also allow people to fully generate an adventure ahead of time if they want it. Once I knew like the framework that I was going to be working with, it was a matter of let's engage with this media. Let's refresh myself on everything that I'm in conversation with here, and let's write down the things that stand out. So I did like an extremely involved and critical playthrough of the first Dead Space. And Dead Space 2. And as I played through, I wrote anytime there was something that like really caught my attention, I wrote it down and I took time to think about like why do these save points stick out to me? Why does this HUD stick out to me? Why do these characters or this objective marker, why do these individual little pieces really stick out to me? And what does that say about this piece of media? I did 2 watch throughs of Event Horizon. I did one where I was just enjoying it and not really writing anything down. And then a week later, I watched through it again, pausing it almost anytime something happened and taking notes on like, what does this thing mean here? Figuring out the key things that really stand out in the genre allowed me to consider why they stand out to me and what aspects of those I wanted to bring into the game. You called it a genre scaffold and like a part of the genre, and that's very much intentional in this game. It is, from my perspective as the designer, it is undeniably in conversation with everything that came before it. It is not just like, oh, here we go, it's a fun, scary game. But I am engaging with and talking about the history of the genre in this project.
Yeah, which is what feels very sort of exciting about. Like, I think I have much less sort of familiarity with that kind of genre of horror, kind of outside of like the big hits like Alien and the first Dead Space. So it feels very interesting to read through and feel like I'm sort of learning more about it. And it was when I wrote like Fear the Taste of Blood, which was like Universal monster movies. And I think I did a similar approach of like watching stuff, but also watching it very like I just made a face for an audio medium, but very like hyper focused in terms of how I was thinking about the genre.
Very intentional, I think, is kind of a word to use for it. Like intentionally viewing something, critically viewing something. Mm-hmm. I honestly, it's something I advise everybody to do. If you're working on a piece inspired by something, you should really sit back and like, it's gonna double your watch time for the thing, but really take the time to consider stuff as you watch through it. it's fun and like really eye-opening.
Yeah. My part of my background at like university was like film studies as well, so that's like a way I'm used to sort of diving in, and I think it does inform some of my games, but not all of them. Whereas I'm gonna move, I then have two next questions which focus on Little Wolves, the game which we talked about before in terms of like coming to back a kit. Can re-mention that, but I know you actually have answers prepared here from Jam.
Yes. So we can go through these questions, but I will just say for the audience, Little Wolves, just quick overview of it is it's a folktale TTRPG where you play as shape-shifting werewolves in the Enchanted Forest, which is a realm of folk tales and fae and magic and mystery. It's a very fairy tale game. We're coming to backer kit with this soon. I'm involved in this project as like a designer and kind of a project manager and keeping everything together. But it is really Jam's baby. She is the lead on the project. She has designed the world and been the kind of decision maker and the guideline giver on the mechanical side of things, which is where I'm focused. These are excellent questions, and I spent some time talking with Jam about these questions so that we could prepare some really detailed answers from.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll go on to these questions. I actually will like later in this episode ask him more about the collaboration and collaboration in general, because I do find it such an interesting topic. But on the Wolves, as you said, it draws lots of inspiration from fairy tales and folk legends. And I was wondering whether there were any sort of specific stories the two of you had in mind during the design process, because that's such such a wide kind of storytelling and literature.
Yeah, inspirations kind of come from all over the place. For me, I think a lot about stories of transformation and society. Things like Secret of the Kells and Wolfwalkers are really big, clear pulls, but I also think about stuff like Scavenger's Reign, Over the Garden Wall, and the various webcomics by Evan Dom, who is a fantastic writer and artist. For Jam, while she does keep in mind like all sorts of classical tales that she's heard of and researched, she's been more inspired by retellings or spins on those older stories. Shows like Hilda, Cartoon Saloon's folklore films, Over the Garden Wall again, and even, the Grimm's fairy tales are all big touchstone. While there's definitely inspiration from that classic stuff, there's more inspiration that comes from their retellings. And spinning from that, there's a lot of stuff in Little Wolves that itself is a thoughtful, exciting retelling of existing myth. As an example, there are our goblins in the game. Rather than being evil little guys, they are passionate, kind of compulsive creatures that love vegetables and taking care of the land and participating in agriculture and like crafting and handy. And then we've got our Fae Queens that are in the game. And a lot of fairy tales, the idea of a magical queen or a Fae Queen is usually like outlined with some level of sinister intent. And in the real world, European queens are these supposed absolute symbols of authority that are kind of only in those positions of power because of their bloodline or marriage. In Little Wolves, we really wanted to not do that. Every court in Little Wolves carries its own traditions and its own cultures that relate to how they elect their leaders. And there are no unchanging seats of power.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I can also super see some of those different things like immediately. As a big fan of Hilda and Wolfwalkers and like Song of the Sea and such, I'm like, oh yeah, that sort of specific retelling focus that I think does come across really powerfully in like the demo, at least from what I've seen. The next question I then had on these notes was
the retelling stuff is even louder, and like there's so much more of it in the main game. I really cannot wait for us to finish this project and get to release this stuff. The work that Jam has done on the setting and like the lore is incredible.
Yeah, like the intro and the demo begins with like all of the breakdowns of different courts, and it's so immediately just sort of like joyful to sort of explore that, and I'm really excited to see more from the world as like as the campaign begins and the full game comes closer. Your main characters in Little Wolves are werewolves, but a take on werewolves that has it as a innate magical power rather than a curse or a sickness. We'd mentioned wolf walkers in some form, which is maybe similar, though actually there I think it is at least passed on to the main character. But yeah, I was wondering what inspired the conception of werewolves in the game.
Yeah. So this is the other question that we have a very detailed response from Jam to. First, it started as knowing that she wanted to have a game with some sort of physical craft that changed over time. After trying a few things like clay, she ended up with masks, which then led to werewolves, transformation, and things like that. And from there, it grew pretty naturally into defining the capabilities of the characters. Is kind of where the progenation of, doing werewolves came from. And when it came to the approach to werewolves and the way that they exist in the Enchanted Forest, there was a lot of thought put into, the kinds of stories that we want to tell in our games. Historically and culturally, werewolves and lycanthropy have a lot of baggage, and they often tie into themes of otherness, queerness, and those stories have these tragic characters who, despite themselves, aren't in control of their actions in one way or another, and they're kind of at the mercy of these societies that they're in. They present these queer metaphors as monsters that have only one outcome, and that is often death in werewolf stories. Neither of us wanted that to be the kind of realm that you're playing in Little Wolves. There's no spreading lycanthropy as a disease. This is a self-chosen presentation tied to magical abilities. And importantly, it's tied to culture. When you look at the in-game lore and you read the ancestry of the shapeshifters, you learn that these werewolves are descendants of immigrants. They came from humans who traveled to this realm and found a home. It's a very important and personal position for Jam to put the players in because her parents immigrated to the US. It turned out that there was a kind of unplanned sweet treat with all of these themes and how they tie into mass creation too. There's something very special about getting the time to sit down and make something that represents your character. Something like a little self-carry about it. And then lastly, if you look at all of that in relationship to those other werewolf stories where these creatures that you're making would be beasts to be avoided or feared or shunned. Instead, you see this new through line about getting to care for and spend time with this traditionally othered character or yourself and your friends. And it all kind of came together very nicely.
Yeah, it's like carrying so many different things in it, both throughout play but also like thematic elements, and yeah, it's really beautiful. Thank you to you for sharing that, and thank you for Jam having prepared that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love all of the work that we are doing in Little Wolves. It is very much hitting a exciting and meaningful melding of themes and mechanics for us, which is something that we really love to do. And I think that Little Wolves is probably our game that is most successful at doing that. I think about it a lot.
I will jump actually from here to a question that like links to collaboration a bit. Like, so Jam's layout was really gorgeous and striking in every game they've worked on. But what I was wondering in terms of your collaboration, I get the sense from what you've talked about, like in terms of who's leading on a project or not, it may vary depending on. Do you have a sense of like how things are going to be presented before you're in the weeds of writing, and does that inform your process, or does it sometimes work in different sort of directions?
We don't always have like, and we'll probably have like some aesthetic touchstones for things that we kind of want to do with it. Like, with Little Wolves, we knew that we know going in that we want this to be very fairy tale, very storybook, right? We know that that's kind of the presentation it's going to lean into. With You're in Space, we knew that we wanted it to have these stark contrasts between clean lines and messy gore. And we knew that we wanted a limited color palette. But aside from that, we don't necessarily know, like, this is going to be presented using this exact font. We kind of get the aesthetic ground rules laid out. And then as we design the game, we write things in a way that are like, okay, this is going to be a header. This is going to be a table. This should be pull-out text. But the specifics of it, no, not usually. Not until we get those first layout samples.
Right.
It's our creative process for working together on that stuff. We learn every single time we do something. We are refining our methods and, getting better at working together in these ways. And it kind of just, it comes together as it does, I guess.
Yeah. Any kind of collaboration is always informing itself.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, whilst still thinking about the mask making element in Little Wolves, I think there's a real physicality to the process of play in many of your games. There's like the mask making there, like the way the case is mapped out in Justicar, and I was thinking even a card play and having a hand of cards feels more physical to me than rolling dice. I guess for the fact of it's static and you've got that held with you versus dice which you pick up when it is their time. So I'm interested in what a form informs these different approaches and how you find the right approach for each game.
Yeah. Like a lot of the work we do, it kind of starts with theme. We go theme, then we go, how what kind of mechanic do we need here, or how best can we represent this at the table? For my part, it is mostly theme first, but we both also really like to have artifacts of play. We really like when players are done, they have some kind of physical thing, whether that's, the memory of the physicality of taking cards from one another. Or, pictures of this ridiculous crime web that they put together. Or, of course, the masks in Little Wolves. Or the ridiculous abstract art that you make in Dinocar. We like people having a thing to remember the game by. It's very fun to finish a game with, something that shows you what you did. It's not just the notes in your journal. It's this splattered mess of ink and paint and stickers that you just spent an hour making with your friends.
Yeah. I, as someone who tries to scrapbook, I definitely see the appeal of having still memory of oh yeah, this is the physical manifestation or representation of the time we just spent together.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the specificity of experience, sometimes I was thinking that a lot of your games have specific player counts and various roles that play differently. Like the gun and the slinger have access to different moves. What could have been the responsibilities of a traditional singular GM role in Justicar is kind of split between the Strand and the Judge. Space, you're in space and everything's fucked, is intended as a two-player experience primarily, though you do flag up ways it could play out differently. And similar to I imagine this might be a thing of coming from the theme. How do you approach decisions about player count and then the different roles you want to feature in play?
Yeah, you got a called shot on that one. It is absolutely spinning off of the theme. Kind of, Gun&Slinger actually originally was going to be a 2-player competitive game using Go Fish about a gunslinger fighting their gun. And that just kind of grew into this RPG, and it made sense to keep those roles as separate characters. Then Justicar, it was a matter of, all right, I don't want a GM here. What are the seats in a courtroom? Kind of like the process that I mentioned earlier of writing out everything that's involved in a courtroom drama. What are the seats in a courtroom? How does that play at a table? And how do I make that with a easily gatherable player count? Because Justicar would be practically impossible to ever get a game together for if you had a different character for every witness.
Yeah.
So I already knew there that there was going to be a single role that played the witnesses. It's like, all right, what are the other key players? The judge, the prosecution, and the defense. All right. Are the prosecution and defense meaningfully different from each other? No, they're not. So they're going to get the same kind of moves. What the hell does the judge do? All right, well, let's look at judges in My Cousin Vinny and in Legally Blonde and in the Ace Attorney series. What do? They kind of prod people in the courtroom, or they like steer things in a direction, and they all have biases. It was very much about like figuring out what the roles are that need to exist in order to tell this story, and then figuring out what those roles do and how players interact with the rules in different ways. And with Space Fucked, intending it as a 2-player game comes down to the load or no prep, being able to put a game of it together if nobody else is available, and being able to really lean into the horror. Like I said, I want people to try and play that game terrifying, and that's much easier to do when it's just 2 people. It's perfectly possible to play that game pants-shittingly terrifying with like 3 or 4 people, but we all know that we're going to be goofier in a larger group of players.
Yeah. It's you get one extra person to play off, and the temptation to throw out a witty line is just a bit higher.
And that's fine. Like, it works great. Like I said, horror and comedy play together perfectly, right? Tossing comedy into your horror game is like adding salt to something sweet. It's just going to make it that much more power, as long as you don't add too much.
You were the artist for Space Fucked as well, whereas on the majority of other projects, you've worked with other artists, at least the majority of like what I did for reading. How do those two processes compare to you?
They are incredibly different. I'll start by saying that like one of my favorite things to do and be able to do because of the success that our projects have had, I love to be able to just find a really cool artist and say, this is kind of what I want. Here's the money. Make something cool. Thanks. It's awesome it's just so awesome to be able to trust somebody to make incredible work, and also to not have to worry about doing that myself. For You're in Space, it was actually a very kind of emotional or cathartic process for me. I have a kind of talking back to the high school conversation earlier, I have a bit of a fraught relationship with making art and doing art. When I was in that art course in high school, I had a few teachers who were bad. They were very mean. I was very discouraged from doing artwork. They never liked the stuff that I made. And, as much as I enjoyed doing this stuff, the damage that they did was there. And I kind of just stopped doing it, despite enjoying it. When it came time to do Space Fucked, I had been finding new kinds of art, like people making their own pens and doing art with that, like soda can pens and stuff like that. And I wanted to try that. So I tried it, realized that what I was making looked pretty cool, and Jam encouraged me to be the artist on this project. The process is completely different, especially with that being my relationship to art. I had to put more consideration into it. I realized how much time goes into these things. I always knew that there was a lot of time in making art, which is why I'm more than happy to pay people well to do what they do. But it made it very clear exactly how much is in it. And I would consider the art that I did not low effort, but lower effort because of how stylized it is. And even that was a lot. But I will say that it was a very rewarding process. And it's something that I would encourage people to try and do on their projects.
Yeah. I can completely understand how that felt. Hopefully very healing.
It was. I actually think I wrote a post over on Co-host that was about like what it's like to get back into art and like kind of finding the love of doing that. And also just how cool it is to make your own pins. Everybody should make a soda can pin and just go to town with it. It is so fun.
This is sick. I gotta look that up after this, actually, because it's not something I know much about.
Definitely do.
So, yeah, speaking about working with artists and then obviously working with Jam, which we've talked about as well, I was wondering about your attitude to collaboration. What's the kind of like working relationships you try and foster? And I imagine this is very variable depending on the collaborator, of course. But yeah, I was wondering about like how you do go into different collaborations.
Yeah. I kind of approach every collaboration that I do in the same way, honestly. There's kind of a baseline that I have for myself when it comes to working with another creator, whether that's Jam or anybody else. It has to it has to be a respectful relationship, obviously. But we also have to be having fun while we're working on something. If we're working on something together and it feels like pulling teeth and neither of us come away from our work feeling, a sense of pride or reward or fun from it, then why are we working together? Why are we making this is, I guess, more the thing. Having consistency in a work schedule is important. Making sure that everybody is on the same page with who's doing what and when is important. Making sure that everybody is, being on the same page and having shared drive to finish a project is really what I kind of try to bring into any collaboration I do. I think that's helped by the fact that I'm quite literally a project manager for my day job. So it makes it pretty easy for me to help the things that I work on stick to a goal and work towards a deadline and stay on track.
Yeah. So like switching track as we get to the end of the episode to some more sort of like general process things. I was wondering if you've ever noticed like what reading you do that informs your writing, essentially.
Yeah. I'm gonna ascribe a big, wide definition to reading here, because I don't actually pick up a book and read it a whole lot. It's something I'm working on. But anything, everything, any video game that I play, any show or movie that I watch, conversations that I have, like everything that I engage with informs my writing and my game design. I think that's incredibly clear from the stuff that we've released so far.
Yeah, I'm so pro a very wide, expansive definition of reading, which is what I tried to do like when I was a teacher, and it was kind of based on. I got made to take spelling tests like very late because I just had like a special educational needs thing on my record, which means they don't actually like treat you as an individual. They just make you send tests that they send to everyone with that thing on the record. I remember it reminded me talking about my mum, and my mum said, like, you actually read all the time. And I was like, I feel like by the point of the age I was then, I was like, I read in summer when it's my birthday and I get new books, and I read at Christmas when I get books then. And otherwise I don't read in between. And my mum was like, you're reading every day. You're doing all of this stuff that is absorbing texts and other things. And I was trying to always say that when parents, when I was a teacher, would ask about, oh, how do I get them into reading? I was like, well, what do they like? And start small. Start with like magazines about the things they like. Try and treat your child as human. I think is a good thing to do.
that might be a good. I don't know. I think that might be good.
Yeah, I'm pro it. And it was a little disillusioning how many times you have to explain that to someone. Switching track off of education entirely. Yeah. Have you ever then noticed sort of subtler influences from other mediums that you feel might have informed you?
I have no subtle influences, is my answer to this one. Nothing subtle. It's all loud. It's all there. I think you can very easily look at the stuff that I've made and go, oh, I bet this is inspired by XYZ. And you're probably right.
Yeah. Like, oh, I know what I'm getting into.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like with influences and stuff. When I had the Justicar line, I think like reading it on Twitter or saying like, oh, it's by things like Ace Attorney and My Cousin Vinny. I remember finding it so interesting to see because I was suddenly like, oh, yeah, there's a line between those. I've not thought of them because they're in this different medium, but I am having my own sense of like genre and different storytellings and stuff informed by this other new entry into something, which is what I think I find very
100%.
interesting about genre so much. Yeah.
Yeah,
I do have
truly
one last...
like
Oh, sorry.
truly I like don't want to do subtle influences. I've said it before in this conversation. I like to be loud. I'm a loud person with my voice, and I am a loud person with the things that I create. I don't have subtle influences. I want people to be able to know what the influences are and see how I'm in conversation with it. I think that's kind of the important part about taking inspiration from something, especially when you do it as clearly and loudly as I do. You need to be not just pulling on things for aesthetic vibes. You need to be in conversation with the thing that you were inspired by. Otherwise, it's just aesthetics, and it's not really doing much.
Yeah, I totally agree. Before we go to the last question of the episode, firstly, I'd just like to thank you for coming on to the show. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And then I'd also like you to just tell the audience and listeners who might not have been familiar with you before, where they can find you and keep up with your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This has been a blast. I love to talk about the stuff that we're making, and these questions are all incredible. You can find, first I'll say you can find Little Wolves at bytes.rip, bytes.rip/Little Wolves. That's going to take you to the Backrocket page where you can follow it. We're launching May 14th, and we want a fun day one, so let's make it happen. Let's go. Spinning off of that, you can find all of our stuff at dinoberrypress.com. We have a Discord that you can join at bytes.rip/Discord. And I'm kind of scattered around on social media, at Dicey Nova or at Fork20. But yeah, social media is social media. Our Discord, our newsletter, and our Backrocket are probably the best pages to find what we're up to.
Right. So the last question I like to ask, what do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned from creating TTRPGs?
I think the biggest thing is that I can do it, is that this is a thing that I can do. And that together with Jam, it's something that we can do. And, not to be biased on Maine or anything, that we're pretty good at doing. It's something I have learned that it's something that I love doing, that I am capable of doing, and that I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. And everybody should do it. Everybody should make a game. If you're out there and you're thinking, wow, I would love to make a game, do it. Go do it. Open up a Word doc and roll 2d6 or something and go from there.
Yeah. No one else will do it for you. Well, actually, you can buy many games, but what I mean is no one will write your game for you.
Yeah.
You need to do that.
No one else will tell you to roll 2d6, all right?
Thank you again. This has been The Life Path of Nevyn Holmes. I have been Kayla Dice. Thank you for listening. Good night.